that okay, Chloe?
Yeah, perfect. Good to go.
Okay, hi everybody. Yeah, we're going to look at our frogs and toads in the UK. Although when Chloe said all of our frogs and toads, there's not a great deal of diversity. There's some stuff that shouldn't be here that we can look at, and there's some rarer species as well. But it's mostly about the common frog and the common toad. So Wales relevant and very much Neath Port Talbot relevant. That's what we're going to be looking at throughout the presentation. What have we got here? What are we looking at? Above is a female common frog. Top right, how do I know she's female? For a start, just overall looking at her, she's very colourful. The males tend to be less colourful than the females in the case of the frogs, other way round to a lot of how a lot of species are perceived by people. If you look at her throat, you can only just see, but it's colourful. It's like a burgundy red colour, the throat. It can't be described as white or pale, can it? Her flanks look quite granular. So the females often have more rougher flanks because it gives more of a purchase for the males to grip during breeding. Okay, so there's quite a few different features there that you can see it's a female. I can see just on the front leg there, on the four of the front leg, you can get a glimpse of how her belly patternization is, and her belly pattern looks to be like a deep reddy brown, marbled with quite pale yellow. That's also very colourful, far too colourful, far more colourful than the male. You'll see what I mean when you see some more pictures and when you experience them in the field. Bottom left, we've got common toads. You've got a pair and amplexus. That's the term we give the piggyback style embrace during breeding. This male is actually hitched a lift on the way to the pond. You can see the female's a lot bigger than the male. That's pretty typical. And you can see the head shape, the difference. The female, obviously the animal at the bottom, the female has a much broader, stronger, wider head, skeletal structure of a head, broader head than the male. And that's the theme that runs throughout bigger animals with a broader head, the females. So a common frog, you can see this one looks very different to the last animal we saw. Different color entirely. People say frogs are green. Well, the common frog isn't. I've never seen a green one. That's about as close as you can possibly get to green, what you're looking at there. And I think you'll find that's more a reflection of the surrounding green moss, reflected by its pale flanks in the photograph there. But that's a male common frog. So you can see the glimpse you get of his throat and underside is pale white, pretty patternless. Okay. He's duller coloration all around than the female, but there's a lot of diversification, a lot of variation. They're a very accessible species. Everybody learns about species when they're children. Well, it always used to be that way. I hope it still is. They're a really good introduction to nature. They're priceless for that, the development of tadpoles, etc. And they're just ecologically invaluable. There's nothing that doesn't eat frogs. Seriously. You can't have too many frogs, and we don't have enough of them. Toad, similar story. Very different animals, though, different ecology, even with their similarities. So that's a big chunky female we've got there. During the terrestrial phase, which they spend the vast majority of their life on land. So she looks like she's got soft, dry, leathery skin, warty skin. Okay, whereas this male on the bottom left, that photograph was taken at a different time of year. So that photograph was taken when they're breeding. So overall, he looks a lot more slimy and slippery. That's not because males are more slimy and slippery than females, although that is often the case with humans. It's more because of the time of year and so the condition of their skin. So if you found a female at that time of year, she'd look very similar to that male and in terms of how her skin is. Whereas if you found a male in the terrestrial phase, his skin would look more like the female in the top right there. Okay. So they don't really breed in people's garden ponds. They've got different requirements for breeding than frogs. We'll explain more about that later on. But you still find them in gardens. That doesn't mean they're going to be breeding. They might be breeding as far as 2 kilometers away. But their foraging grounds, terrestrial grounds, where they spend the vast majority of their lives, can often include people's gardens. So you might be lucky enough to see them in the terrestrial phase. So the frog has got absolute minimal status protection in the UK, which is a shame because it's a very important species. Okay, the toad is just a degree higher. Okay, so they have to be considered during planning and development, etc. But both species got to be understood. They're essential components of the ecosystem. So they're forming both predator and prey relationships. They're managing invertebrate populations. Okay, but they're also feeding a diverse range of other species. Yeah, pretty much key factors of the ecosystem, amphibians. They feed a lot of other species. So let's look at a frog more closely. We did touch on them last week. Smooth skin, very muscly, powerful rear legs, okay? And that quite obvious raised part of the back in between the two rear legs, which is quite obvious in frogs because their pelvis structure is very different to that of toads with the powerful jumping they can do, okay? The eyes, they're behind the eye, there's a patch of skin that's always darker than the ground color of the rest of the body. And you can see the eardrum, the tympanum, that perfect circle quite clearly within that. So male frogs, people can find it difficult to tell them apart. We touched on it earlier straight away when I showed you those first pictures. But top right, you've got a male frog, again, similar to what we're talking about with the toads just now. That male frog, that photograph on the top right, was taken during the breeding season. So just emerged from hibernation, which may indeed have been underwater, believe it or not always, but sometimes. And he's on his way to the water, to whichever part of the water body is that he's going to breed in. And he's in the aquatic phase. His skin is slippery and slimy. He still looks quite flabby. He's in his aquatic phase, okay? Compare that to the animal beneath him. He's in the terrestrial phase, similar to the toads you saw earlier. Their skin really does change depending on whether they are land-based or in the aquatic stage. They also develop nuptial pads on their toes, which females don't develop. But a much better one for me, you don't need to handle the animals, just look at them. It's the kind of Popeye arms that you can see. You see the forearms of that frog in the top right, quite exaggerated, broad forearms, okay? Bottom left, there's a male, typical stance in the breeding ditch or pond, floating at the top there, keenly surveying for females. Anything that moves, literally, frogs are stimulated by movement. Males and females compared, again, I did say before, females to me are generally much more colourful and beautiful. So top right, look at her, she's gorgeous. What a beautiful, colourful animal that is. And that's a British common frog, female. Not unusual to see them that colourful, it really isn't. Bottom right is a yellow one. She's full of spawn. You can see she's on her way to breeding. That's why she's so round. She's literally full of frog spawn. At the top, you can see head on a pair in amplexus. So again, compare the throats. Compare the throat of the animal beneath. So she hasn't got any red on her like the animal on the right. However, she's got bright lemon yellow, marbled with like a chocolate brown. Quite beautiful. Compare that with the throat of the male and the very top, and that's just a pale, kind of bluish tinge to it, but patternless throat by comparison. So I think they're pretty key features that It doesn't talk about this in any of the books at all, but look at that. That's quite easy to tell apart, I think, in my opinion. That pronounced difference is particularly profound upon emergence of hibernation. Maybe the males the throat might look a bit duller and dirtier kind of thing in the terrestrial phase later, but it will still be patternless and pale. And the female's throat will always be that beautiful marbleation. But when they emerge in spring, that contrast is more obvious, as you can see in the picture there. Bottom left, another female frog, full of spawn, on her way to the spawning site. You can see she's got a dark mottled throat, not a pale white one, okay? And you can see the nice colours on the sides there. Very different looking, in my opinion, to males. Again, look at the slightly more granular flanks, the skin on the females. We think this may be to afford more purchase for the males to be able to grip the slippery females during amplexus. Similar species, common toad, obviously, but then not so much in Wales, thankfully, but in parts of England, we have non-native introduced species, such as marsh frogs, edible frogs, and then there's the pool frog complex, which is too complicated to talk about here. But basically, the genus is Pelophylax, which is a totally different group of frogs to what the common frog belongs to. So basically, you've got what we call brown frogs or grass frogs, which is a group of frogs that are a group of species of frogs across Europe that are primarily terrestrial, spend the vast majority of their time on land, and they just breed in a ditch or a pond once a year. Then we've got another group of frogs across Europe called the water frogs or the green frogs. So brown or grass frogs or water and green frogs. And these water or green frogs, they're not all green, but that's what people refer to them as. They are from the genus Pelophylax, whereas the brown or grass frogs are all rana. Okay, so they're two very different basic kinds of frogs. So where you can tell them apart so easily, I think, in their behaviour, is that all of the Pelophylax, be they marsh frog, edible frog, or any of the vast mix-up of different kinds of pool frogs, all of them, they're much more aquatic than the common frog. They spend their life right next to the pond or in the pond. They don't range as far as the common frog does. So they're commonly seen on sunny days at the back, or they're commonly not seen on sunny days on the banks of ponds. And then as you get close to the pond, all you know of them is them propping into the pond, plop, 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 in they go. That's what the marsh frogs are doing on the bottom right there. They're literally sat on the edge on a sunny day on a log, nice and warm with some nice damp moss, basking in the sun right next to the pond. But if you get too close to them, they'll jump straight in. If you see a frog jump out of a pond and literally launch itself from the pond and grab a dragonfly from the air as it flies past, that is not a common frog. That's one of the Pelophylax species. You don't have to get any more into detail than that, then that's a Pelophylax, none of which are native to Wales. Okay. Also, when they call in the breeding season, the males have paired breeding sacs, calling sacs, vocal sacs, sorry, either side of the head, whereas the common frog just has a single calling sac, which is much less noticeable in the throat. Okay, so lots of profound differences. It's very difficult to confuse them. Back to our common toad then. Males, warty skin, like fine lumpy leather, I would describe it. They tend to hop rather than jump. They're less athletic than the frogs. Okay. A key feature is those parotid glands. Can you see that behind the eye, behind each eye on either side of the head? So if you look at the bottom left, the animal, that male on top of the pebbles there. First of all, look, he's got quite a narrow head, A female would have a much broader, wider, blunter head. And then straight away you can see behind each eye, you can see the obvious parotid glands. You can even just about make out the pores in each of these pictures on those glands. And that's one of the areas on the common toad's body where it can release buphotoxins, which is a mild irritant toxin to put off predators. Okay, so that's a really obvious identification feature that frogs don't have. These are the nuptial pads that males develop during the breeding season to help them grip. Again, I don't find that too useful an identification feature because I don't want you people to get that up and close and personal to toads. Okay, so it's not that important. Look at this female though, by comparison. She's a beautiful example of a mature common toad. Proportionately big, broad head, chunky animal. She hasn't got that high, obvious bend in her back in between the rear legs that we saw with the frog because her pelvic structure is very different. She's not geared up for jumping like a frog is, more hopping. And when you look at those rear legs, their thigh muscles, when comparison to what the frog was like, the thigh muscles are pretty pathetic. Yeah, it's very different. And the parotid glands, really obvious behind the eyes. And again, in this picture, you can see the pores there from which they release the buphotoxins when they're stressed. Orange eyes, parotid gland, two good features. These are all females showing some diversification in color. Okay, they're all big, broad, chunky animals. The one on the far right, the nice red one, she was quite young. A lot of young female toads are a reddish color, and they tend, when they're younger, and they tend to lose it. It tends to fade away as they get older, but they retain it to a degree, some more than others. This one was down in Devon, where the soil was very red, and they have quite a few reddish colored toads down there. So similar species. The natterjack is the only other native toad that we have here in the UK. Much different species, much rarer, specialists in the habitat that they live within. Their ecology is so different to the common toad. If you want to try and begin to understand them, start by not associating any of their behaviour or comparing it with common toads, because they're just so different. We won't dwell on them because you're not going to come across them in Eastport Talbot, but I'll just say you've got basically two habitats in the UK. Down in the south of England, sandy heathland, which is where this animal looks like it comes from, blending in with that dark sand underneath it, pale and dark marbleation of the sand, the heathland sand there. That's very different to the type that you see in Wales, which lives in a different habitat. It lives in a habitat that provides the same conditions in a different way. It lives in coastal dune habitat. Okay. Yeah, very different terrestrial needs from other herp species. They need short turf. Their foraging is very different. The methodology is very different. They chase and run down insects. They call them the running toads. Okay. Short turf, they share habitat with things like choughs for the same reason. It's easy to see small invertebrates and chase them and run them down there. So natterjack ponds tend to be unshaded, ephemeral, okay, temporary, basically seasonal, really shallow with gradually sloping sides. Very, very shallow so that it heats up so quickly, often free of predators and competitors because they're temporary and they've literally just filled up with spring rain. Dragonfly larvae haven't had a chance yet. There's hardly any predators there. Sometimes it's just bare sand in the dunes. Yeah, and it's a race for the tadpoles to become toadlets. You can almost see them growing. Little or no vegetation, just shallow, sun-drenched, algae growing. They're growing as quick as fast as they can to get out of there. Here's some typical situations where you find natterjacks in their kind of habitat. And there is a male natterjack with more the kind that you find in Wales. This is up in North Wales and Flintshire and the sand dunes there. He's calling, huge, great big vocal sac. Generally, nearly always, but not 100% of the time, because most of the time they have this pale stripe. They're quite colourful, incredibly noisy. You can hear them from a mile away when they're gathered. That's because they live in such sparse habitats, and the places that they spawn in are not necessarily going to be the same each year. They need to be able to be heard from a long distance to pull in other natterjacks. So they've got a really powerful voice. But in Port Talbot, you're not going to see any of these. Okay. There are other similar species that you might see elsewhere in Wales. The midwife toad is one. It's not native, but we've got a population of them in Llandrydnod. They've been there for quite some time. They seem to be not causing any real issues. They've not tested. They've tested clear for things like chytridiomycosis, which is a serious fungal pathogen to be worried about. So they're not really posing a threat. We think they come over with imports of plants, or have done in the past, that kind of stuff, horticultural imports. They have a fascinating breeding behaviour. They call them the midwife toad. The males are modern thinking toads, and they undertake the childcare. They wrap the eggs around their legs and they carry them around, keeping them damp in humid areas until the eggs are ready to hatch. Then they reverse into the water and release them into the tadpoles into the water. So very different kinds of toad, completely different genus to what we're used to here. Very small, very hard to see. You're more likely to hear them at night calling from somebody underneath somebody's decking in a garden in Llandrydnod Bells, and you could be forgiven for thinking it's somebody's mobile phone with an alarm or something. It's like an electronic beep. Back to our native, the common frog. It's got a broad distribution across Europe and further, as you can see. As a youngster. Toads also very, very broad distributed across Europe and Asia. It's the most widespread species of toad we have in the UK. By comparison to the natterjack we just looked at, the natterjack is a rarity, very much so, restricted to very specialist habitat. Common toad is a generalist and can occur in a wide range of habitat types. When we're looking at the UK, overall, we've also got Bufospinosis, which is found on Jersey, which is unsurprising when you look at it because of its proximity to other parts of Europe where spinosis is the predominant species of toad. Okay, it looks very similar to the common toad, behaves a little bit more like a natterjack, something between. So a frog, habitat requirements, really simple to understand. Basically, they have to have a water body to breed in, plus plenty of terrestrial vegetation to keep them humid and sheltered when they're on the land. And when you consider that the vast majority of their life is spent on land, that's really important. So I touched on it last week. Frogs ideally won't be breeding in permanent ponds, well-established ponds. This is a ditch. This is in Port Talbot. This is in the Knoll Park. It's a ditch which fills up in the spring and kind of dries out later on at the end of the year. But frogs like breeding in that ditch. They also like to breed in stuff that can bait situations which are barely more than puddles. Yeah, very small little patches of water in tussocky moorland, not permanent ponds. Okay, so what's all that about? Why are they spawning in situations that look like they might dry out and they might not go full term? This is a picture of a well-established pond, but showing you the very edges are very shallow and you can see the grass encroaching there. And this is a situation where frogs will utilize those edges of a well-established pond. But their preference is like a temporary ditch, shallow pool. So what's that about? Well, very shallow water like that warms up really quickly. Algae grows really quickly. When the frog spawn's deposited in it, the algae will grow on that spawn really quickly too. But there won't be many predators there. Compared to a permanent pond, which is full of predators, a ditch won't have many predators in it, or a puddle won't have many predators in it. What we have to remember about frogs is literally everything wants to eat them, everything I could possibly think of. It's hard to think of something that doesn't predate frogs, be it in the egg, tadpole, or adult stage. Toads a bit different, but they spend even more time on land. Okay, they've got a wide range of habitats that they occur at. They're generally like a blend of habitats because then they get a blend of invertebrate prey, nice diverse range of invertebrate prey. Okay, breeding wise, their ideal situation is the opposite to frogs. Okay, remember the frog, the common frog, Rana temperaria. It likes, they call it the Rana temperaria, the temporary frog, because its breeding strategy is explosive and they would just see it for a few days. That's the temporary frog, and then it disappears. But it also likes temporary water bodies. This is different for the toad. You can't describe that as a temporary water body. We're looking at there. That's a lake, a small lake, but it's a lake. And this is in East Port Talbot too. This is up. Oh, what's this one called? Up near Gwaunquaguryn, up that direction somewhere. Anyway, toads use it. It's a big open water body. It has fish in it. It has lots of vertical reeds all the way around the edge. It's a permanent water body. Total other end of the spectrum from what frogs prefer to breed in. Another example of it, big permanent lake. Okay. So lakes, gravel pits, large garden ponds, rarely in the normal garden pond though. Canals, often with fish present. So coarse fish in lakes, often with the vertical reeds like we can see above to wind their egg strings around. So you're more likely to have toads around if you've got suitable breeding ponds, a blend of different habitat types across that isn't carved up with roads, hibernation opportunities, and not too high up. Okay. They do occur in urban situations, but what's not ideal there is the amount of roads they have to cross, okay, during the breeding migration. Frogs, hibernation, generally any frost-free retreat, pile of rubble, log pile, etc. Root cavities, lots of situations where they can get tucked away safely below the frost line. I say safely. It's not safe if some rats discover it. Okay. Something that's amazing about amphibian skin, particularly with the common frog, is they're able to diffuse oxygen through their skin, so they can actually hibernate beneath the bottom, at the bottom of ponds, sometimes in dead leaves. That's quite an amazing trick. Okay, you can see the animals that have done that because they look like the grey leaves at the bottom of the ditch, like this flabby looking male here. Okay. Terrestrially hibernating males don't look the same. Okay, they look very different. So some of the terrestrially hibernating males, well, the terrestrially hibernating males, they tend to be too late when they get to the breeding ditch because the ones that have hibernated aquatically are already there grabbing all the females. Okay, but in years when it freezes over totally and it's starved of oxygen, the aquatically hibernating animals are likely to die. And that's the year when the terrestrially hibernating males will take over. So they've got they've got an insurance policy basically. But it's amazing skill to be able to hibernate at the bottom of a pond. Sometimes they'll hibernate at the bottom of a ditch, a deeper pond where there's more oxygen, and they'll move across to the ditch when they emerge, where they breed in straight away afterwards. Toads terrestrially hibernating generally, and you can see them tucked away on the right there in some leaf litter. On the left, you can just make out some males that have arrived in the breeding pond, and they're waiting at the bottom of the pond for the arrival of females. Okay. Frogs are the explosive breeding strategy, so that just means they inundate an area with breeding adults so that predators are inundated with sheer numbers, and so a percentage of the frogs will survive. Now, that used to work really well. I can see the difference. When I was a kid, frogs would breed in early March. Toads would breed in the first week of April. It was that regular. Climate change now, half a century later, frogs are breeding in December in Cornwall and Devon, January in a lot of Wales, February in most of it. Toads often breeding in March, etc. So it's really changed, but it's been stretched out longer rather than being as explosive as it used to be. So the steady flow of breeding animals rather than the sudden explosion that it used to be isn't good for them either, because it means there's more opportunities for them to get picked off. So that's another way climate change may be affecting them. So the males hang around, calling, waiting for the females to arrive, and then it's a free-for-all to grab the females when they arrive, and it's quite ungentlemanly. You can see these guys calling. You can see his pale blue throat extending in a positive mat of spawn clumps you can see there and amongst it. The females, once they've deposited, they've gone. Get out of there. But the males are hanging around waiting for more females, and there's a lot of jostling and wrestling going on. Yeah, and movement stimulates them. With anurans, frogs and toads, movement is a key stimulus in their ecology throughout. So they need moving prey to stimulate them to feed. And at the breeding time, if it moves, grab hold of it. It might be a female. Okay. So there's a lot of awkward jostling going on amongst the males as they're moving around there. Toads also breeding is explosive. Mass migration, and they tend to travel longer distances than the frogs. Nearly always occurs at night. Lots of issues with crossing roads. There's a group of males on the left waiting in a very similar style that you saw the male frog waiting, and they're literally scanning, watching for movement, trying to keep still and not distract each other, but they're scanning, waiting for movement. Hopefully it's going to be a big female full of spawn. A little bit later than when frogs spawn, but we see a lot of overlapping now where they're in water bodies at the same time, which you never used to, which creates all kinds of confusion also. So temperature is key to their activity, along with moon phases. Okay. Rainfall, that's key as well. Temperature, just got to be above 9 degrees centigrade. So mild winters can get them moving early. Okay. Calling, frogs have got a very low rumble, the common frog. You can see this guy. This was it. The knoll and Neath. So another Neath but Talbot frog. You can see him calling. That's as inflated as it gets at the bottom. So when you compare that to the natterjack, it's pretty pathetic. Toads, it's more of a high-pitched piping call. People often confuse it for waterfowl, moorhens, coots, or something like that. Amplexus, in the case of frogs, this is the piggyback style embrace. So let's have a look closely then at the comparison of the throats, as we were saying earlier about differentiating between the genders. So here's a good example for you. So in Amplexus, the male is on top of the female. So all of these animals on the top here of these pairs, they've all got pale, patternless, pale blue, bluish throats, okay, whitish blue throats. Compare that with the females, they've all got dark, marbled, coloured throats of various different shades. Okay, and I think that's quite a key feature for you to tell them apart. It's more obvious in the spring, but it remains like that. So It's not actually mating. Okay, it's just him hanging on, waiting for her to release the spawn into the water, pretty similar to fishes. Okay, and then he'll release sperm in the water simultaneously when she deposits spawn. Toads, very similar. The male on the top left there, he's in an upright position on his way to a pond, scanning, looking for a female. On the right, you can see a pair of amplexus terrestrially, where the male has successfully hitchhiked a lift to a pond. So earlier I was saying they often come back to the same pond. Sometimes a male will jump on top of a female who's not necessarily going to be going to the same pond that he was going to go to. So they'll get taken to different ponds like that. So they certainly don't read the books. Males tend to usually get the bulk of them will arrive at the water body first. And just like with the frogs, they're stimulated by movement, and there's quite a frantic amount of jostling and wrestling going on. Here's a pair of amplexus in the water, and you can see they're also sloughing, shedding their skin. You can see that like ghosty type skin flaking off them. And there's a pair of amplexus in the water, much bigger female below, much broader, wider head. So, yeah, the different species have different evolutionary strategies, and sometimes there's elements of them which can become a disadvantage. Okay, so spawning knots is a phenomenon associated and seen with explosive breeding strategies. So when you've got so many animals at once, you can get too many males grabbing hold of the poor, unfortunate females. I said it's quite ungentlemanly. So you can see here the problem can be not just in the water, but on the land. You can see there's a pile of them on top of a poor female on the way to the pond there. Um, it can cause a problem in the water, particularly because of drowning. The potentially female can drown. And so we call it a knot, a spawning knot. And it's just one of the hazards of that time of year for frogs. You can see a spawning knot there, bottom left, and a torchlight at night, right in the middle of a mat of multiple clumps of spawn. And a close-up view there as well. Poor female in the middle of it. She's quite close to the surface. She's going to get a gulp of air now. But you can see there she's got a much more obviously colourful arm and head compared to the males again. Okay, much more colourful on the whole in general than the males. Same thing going on with toads, spawning knots can be really dangerous for the poor females. Drowning can occur. Okay, so this is something that can go wrong. Let's look at frog spawn. I won't dwell on it for too long. Surely everybody's seen frog spawn or is aware of frog spawn, what it looks like. So when it's laid initially in really shallow ditches, temporary pools, flooded golf courses, you name it, it's quite a tight, compact jelly like you can see in the top right there. But as it spends more time in the water, it tends to expand and soften the jelly. When you get multiple clumps, we call it a mat. And you can see the bottom left there, a mat being formed, a spawning mat. There's many clumps there. Each clump will have over 1,000 eggs in it. That's explosive breeding. Again, in that picture, you can see the white throats of the males compared to the females below in the pairs there. And then close up of a spawning mat on the right, you can see some albino spawn amongst it. That does occur more often than you think. Saw some in Carmarthenshire recently. Toad spawn is different. It's in strings. And the females, it's harder to see toad spawn because it's not up in the shallows like the frog spawn. They tend to wrap it around emerged plants, as you can see there on the right. And you have to peer through the water into the water, and you can see where the female toad with the male on her back has repeatedly gone backwards and forwards throughout those yellow flag iris and wound her egg strings around them. Okay, and at this time of the year, when she spawned, the yellow flag iris are just emerging, as you can see. So they're not going to block out any sunlight to that spawn, those spawn strings. So they'll develop nicely, suspended up high in the water column in the sunlight. Okay. By the time the yellow flag iris is developed and is shading that bit of water, the tadpoles will be long gone. Frog tadpoles, people say they're black. As you can see in the bottom left there, close-up view of these developing tadpoles, they're not all the same color. There's so much variation in them. Okay, and that's accentuated as they develop. So initially they've got some external gills, which starts to disappear. When they hatch out, top right, you can see the green, overall green coloration. That is algae that's already growing on the jelly of the egg mass, because the frog has chosen, the mother frog has laid the spawn in a really shallow water body, exposed to the sunlight. The algae has grown so quickly. As the tadpoles are emerging, they're feeding on it right in front of them straight away. And that's what that writhing mass is in the egg mass there of tadpoles in the sun, scoffing their way through the dissolving egg jelly, which has got algae growing on it. Okay. By the time they've eaten that, then they're properly free swimming and they'll move away from there. But they're definitely not black. Okay. So you can see a common frog tadpole, quite a well-developed common frog tadpole there on the left of the picture. It's kind of an olivey, greeny brown color, some pinky golden speckles, but that's just one individual. They're very varied, okay, incredibly varied, but they're not black by any stretch of imagination. The tadpole to the right, for comparison, slightly smaller, eggs laid later in the year, so less time to develop, but definitely more of a uniform kind of, it looks black, but kind of a Bourneville chocolate color when you see it in the daylight. Very different to the frog tadpole. That is a common toad tadpole on the right, compared to a frog tadpole on the left. Golden eye of the frog tadpole as well. That's not apparent with the toad tadpole. Very, very different. The behavior is very different as well. So here's some toad tadpoles. Okay. It really depends on the temperatures as to how quickly they hatch out, but the behavior is so different to frog tadpoles. So the habitat is different. There are more permanent water bodies. They shoal. They shoal together. They keep together. If you were to look into a pond, peer over a pond with tadpoles in it, and they all swim away and react to you being there, they swim away down into the bottom in their own separate directions, hiding in the mud, then those are frog tadpoles. Everything wants to eat frog tadpoles. They're on the menu for everything. They just want to get out the way. Okay. These tadpoles you can see here, you can see in the picture in the bottom left. Incidentally, that was in Neath Port Talbot. Also, that was at Ton Mawr in the mine water treatment plant. You can see the orangey tinge to the water there. But they shoal, the tadpoles shoal, and they're not the slightest bit bothered by the photographer's presence. They're just carrying on about their business. They're in the shallows there because there's algae they can graze. And you can see these toad tadpoles doing the same thing. They're in the shallows, very, very shallows of the lake that they're feeding in. And they're in the shallows because it's warm and there's algae growing there. And you can see some of them, their heads poking out. They're on that floating bit of decaying reed that's covered in algae, scoffing away there. But the thing is, they're in a shoal together. There's a metamorph frog, just about to lose its tail. You can tell it's a frog, the proportions of it. Look how muscly and athletic its rear legs are. That's not a toad, that's a frog, okay? By comparison, toads, pretty pathetic. Look at that one below there. Looks really skinny, really thin legs. It's just emerged en masse. There's a load of them together, aggregating. They're so small, they can dehydrate easily. So they can quite often aggregate like this en masse when they emerge. Very different to the frog metamorphs. Much more synchronized because they shoal, they're together all the time. They emerge synchronized. Different to the frog tadpoles that tend to be in different parts of the pond from each other, and they emerge at a more staggered rate rather than the toads, which is so synchronized. Okay, because they've been shoaling as tadpoles. The terrestrial phase, for frogs, the skin really is different to when they're in the water, as discussed previously. So here's an example, an extreme example of how brightly coloured the females can be. That is a UK common frog female. Isn't she spectacular? She could rival something from the Amazon, but that's a common frog female. Below, we've got some terrestrial phase frogs, more typically coloured. But it's very different looking in the breeding season, okay? Much more slippery and slimy and wet. So in the aquatic phase, amphibians are fighting to keep water out of their body. Yeah. In the terrestrial phase, they're fighting to keep water inside their body. So they undertake a pretty profound change. They slough their skin and it changes how it behaves, the skin. So you saw earlier the photograph of the toads in amplexus beneath the water, and you could see them sloughing their skin. They're getting ready for a different kind of existence, albeit not for long. And then the skin gets more adapted to being in the terrestrial phase and keeping water in rather than the other way around. Okay, so it's amphibian skin is an amazing thing. It really is. Here's a female frog, a Neathport Talbot female frog. She's finished spawning. She's laid her spawn, and now she wants to get the hell out of there with all that chaos of the males trying to grab hold of her, even though she's already spawned because she's moving. She's a target. So you can see she looks pretty emaciated. She's come out of hibernation, full of spawn, gone to the pond, not fed, deposited the spawn, and now she's on her way out, away from where she left the spawn. You can see she looks really skinny, but she also looks a lot more slimy compared to the animal in the top right. She needs to go back into the habitat she came from, the terrestrial habitat she came from, woodland probably in that case, and start feeding seriously to build up reserves for next year. Oop, went back there, sorry. Let me go back. Yeah, toads really tend to tuck themselves away well. You can see them in leaf litter there in the woodland, and bottom right in the sand dune. Okay, heathland, sorry. Very similar in sand dune situations. So they can always find a way to tuck themselves away, generally more active at night and tucked away in the daytime. For frogs, if it moves and it can fit in the mouth, then it's on the menu. Few exceptions like hairy caterpillars that they don't like. Okay, but again, like with breeding, the stimuli is moving. The prey has to be moving for them to be stimulated to feed. It's interesting to see that the way they're structured, frogs, their eyes are basically two big balls on top of their head. Okay, so when they swallow, they will blink, and then the underside of their eyes will actually help push the food down their throat, which is quite interesting. You'll see some pictures again in a minute. So if it's smooth, if it moves and it can fit in the mouth, it's considered, they'll have a go. And there can be extreme examples of that. So here we've got a nice big fat female mature common frog, and she's actually eating a young grass snake, or attempting to eat a young grass snake. So that's real role reversal, because it's normally the snakes eating the frog. So I said about the eyes being balls on top of the head. So look at this animal. His eyes are closed and the eyes have sunk down so that the underneath of the eyeball will help push whatever's on the tongue down the throat. Okay, sounds gross, and some of the expressions that the frogs seemingly pull when they're swallowing their food can look like it doesn't taste so good, but it's just that that mechanics. Okay, so toads, they tend to eat less slugs. Frogs like slugs and slimy stuff. Toads like quite the crunchy things like beetles and ants, would you believe it? So a real gardener's friend in managing ants, which obviously from aphids. Lots of predators. So you've got a grass snake feeding on a tadpole, a young grass snake feeding on a tadpole. Bear in mind, we just saw a frog eating a young grass snake. So it balances out. Okay. It's a long list of predators for amphibians. Heron is an obvious one. Seasonally, they take advantage, as do gulls, take advantage of that emotional, explosive breeding strategy when you're inundated with frogs and toads. Okay, corvids, ducks, otters, long list, magpies. Okay, polecats, and then we've got non-native predators like the mink, domestic cat, rat. Rats really do take large numbers of amphibians during the breeding season when they're suddenly inundated with predators, with a potential food source. Sorry, lots of frogs, lots of toads. Rats will cause havoc very often. This is a defense posture that a toad can use against a grass snake. Doesn't always work. It's just trying to be too big to be swallowed. And let's look at these conservation issues. There's so many of them. It would be easy to get depressed. There's lots of nails in the coffin, particularly for amphibians, because their skin, that amazing skin that's porous and can diffuse both gases and liquids, also makes them really susceptible to all manner of things. The list is too depressing to go on about them in detail, but they are even salting roads. When icy conditions, which has to be done to prevent road accidents, even the timing of that can be just before the amphibians are about to migrate to their ponds, and that can cause all kinds of issues. Okay, what are we doing to offset this? Lots of research and lots of habitat creation strategically placed. It's really encouraging to see how frogs and toads respond incredibly quickly to that. There's a load of frog spawn in a pond that was recently restored. Literally straight away, frogs will respond when it's the first spring and a newly created pond or restored habitat, they'll be there. Okay, lots of disease research. We're working with Zoological Society of London closely. Lots of swabbing, lots of testing. Digging ponds for toads as well, helping them across the roads, all that stuff. Amphibian friendly gardens. This is what you can do at home. There's all kinds of things you can do. Obviously, the garden pond. That will tend to benefit newts more in the long term, but you can make little temporary frog puddles, which you clear out every year. So birds will use them as a bird bath too. So if you can imagine just a real shallow puddle you've created, just like a temporary puddle that frogs spawn in naturally. There's hardly any plants in it, no plants in it. There's no predators in it. It's very shallow, full sun. Your frogs will spawn in there February, March. Tadpoles will be gone by the end of June. And it doesn't matter what you do with it then, but you could clear it out and encourage frogs in your garden that way, as well as having a more permanent pond if you want to have both. If you've just got a normal pond, newts will tend to take over long term because, as you know, frogs prefer a temporary water body. But really helpful is structural diversity. So they spend most of their time on the land. So letting a corner or two grow a bit wilder, longer grass, log piles, that kind of stuff is really good for young frogs, toads, and newts to hide in and put on a bit of size and weight safely. So if you can have vegetation going right up to the edge of the pond, that's my garden pond a year after creation, my little boy there at the top right. And you can see there's vegetation right up to the edge, all the way around. There's no paving slabs that will dry and fry out emerging froglets. It's vegetation right up to the side, to the edges, safe for emerging froglets. Okay, there's a female frog hunting in my strawberry patch. If you are growing vegetables, if you've got a pond near the vegetable patch, that's fantastic because the frogs will literally live in the vegetable beds in the summer. So you've got this lush vegetation in the summer, be it potatoes, dwarf beans, etc. And the frogs will live right in amongst it, close to the pond, but in vegetation, chomping down everything that wants to eat your vegetables. So there's lots of things you can do of benefit for amphibians in your garden that will also help you too. Thank you for listening. And there we are. That's it for now.
Oh, fab. Thank you so much, Pete. Does anybody have any questions for Pete? I don't think there's anything in the chat. It is 7:30, so I am conscious of the time. But if anybody does have any questions, feel free either to pop your hand up or pop a question in the chat. Marie?
Shall I kick off the? I was going to say, shall I kick off the?
Oh,
the conversation?
We do have another question though. Pete, James.
Right, okay.
James, do you want to
start
come?
first?
Yeah, thanks for that. That was great. I just wanted to ask: is it known why the females are more colourful than the males? Because it's like opposite to like birds, for example.
Nope.
No, oh, fair enough.
Nope. Absolutely no idea.
Oh, well, thank you for that. That was enjoyed that.
No, that is interesting, actually. You would think it would be the males. It's a good question.
Yeah. No answers for that one.
No, well, fair enough.
Peter, do you want to come in? Peter Harris, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I had a problem with my mic. I'm just wondering, do frogs eat slugs?
Yes, they do. So they can't handle the huge, great big ones, but when the slugs hatch out from eggs, when you've got masses of emerging slugs, the time that they emerge is also the time when frogs are around because they like the same conditions, humid after dark. So if you've got slugs hatching out and you've got multiple frogs in the vicinity, then they will really get on top of the numbers if they're established. Hopefully then they're not getting to the stage of you having lots of huge, great big adults, which tend to be a bit big for them to deal with, but they will have a go, as you saw with the picture of one trying to eat a snake. Okay. Toads aren't so keen on slugs. Frogs like slugs. Frogs don't eat ants. Toads eat ants, so they're both beneficial in different ways for gardeners.
Oh, great, thanks, cheers.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions in the chat now, if that's okay, Pete. So Peter and Claire are asking, is it the wrong time of year to increase breeding habitat for amphibians or not?
That depends where you're doing it. If by increasing amphibian habitat, you mean creating a pond, if it's in a garden, if it's in the middle of a lawn, what are you going to be disturbing? It doesn't matter what time of year you do that. If it's in established habitat, or if you're restoring an existing pond, now's a bit late because we've already got frog spawn everywhere and there's newts in the ponds, but kind of November, December is the ideal window to do it. It's getting reduced all the time because of climate change. Amphibians have got longer activity periods, but I don't want to discourage people from doing stuff, but it really depends on the individual situation. We've been digging ponds for great-crested newts up until quite recently. We're going to be digging some more, even though great-crested newts are already breeding, because the places we're going to be digging the ponds, we've already prepared the habitat by cutting the vegetation beforehand so that nothing's going to be using it, if I'm making any sense. So it's a bit like what I said about digging a pond in the middle of a lawn. You're not going to be disturbing a great deal of biodiversity there. So in answer to your question, it's a little bit late now, really, generally, to be doing that. But it depends where you're going to be doing it, what habitat you're doing it in, if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Thank you. Right, we got any more? Jane is asking, will newts and frogs use the same body of water?
Yes, they will. People often use the same pubs that would rather not be in the same pub as each other. If there's not much choice, frogs and toads will use the same habitat, but as you know, they've got much different requirements, but they're often forced to use what's available. Thing is with frogs and newts, if you're talking about a garden pond situation, remember that frogs like temporary water bodies to breed in because there won't be any newts in there to eat the tadpoles, etc. Okay, but when you dig a garden pond, to start off with, it looks like a puddle because it hasn't got any plants in it, and so frogs will use it straight away. Oh wow, look, It's a new water body, and they'll use it straight away because to them it's like a temporary water body with no predators in it. Within 2 or 3 seasons, you've got newts establishing. They've only got little legs. It takes them longer to get there, whereas the frogs get there quicker in the first place. But then as time goes on, newts will take over basically, and they will be added to the list of predators for frog tadpoles. So by that time, you'll also have dragonfly larvae, damselfly larvae, water scorpions, water beetles, water beetle larvae, as well as newts, all queuing up to eat frog tadpoles. So frogs will tend to not breed there so much, but choose somewhere else. Your neighbour might dig a new garden pond and, oh, we've got lots of frogs here. That's because they've just dug a new one, and the frogs perceive it as being a temporary water body with no predators, whereas yours is a well-established, healthy pond full of predators. Okay, so yeah, frogs and newts do cohabit reluctantly. Newts will eat frog spawn. They're very skilled at sucking the actual eggs out the jelly before they even get a chance to hatch it out. They quaff down tadpoles at an alarming rate for the frogs. That's just how it is. So yeah, small garden ponds tends to favour the newts long term. It's why I was banging on about having trying to do little temporary frog puddles as well as a normal pond at the end slides in the presentation. Can be done.
Thank you. I think that's all of the questions answered. Unless you wanted to ask yours, Marie, before we end.
Not let me lose tonight. Quick question: with the toads, do they have Popeye arms only during the breeding season?
It's smaller frogs. The toads do as well, but it's more obvious. It's more accentuated in the breeding season, in the same way that the pale throat on the male frog is more accentuated. It's still there, but it's just more obvious. Yeah, when they're full of testosterone or whatever it is, the toad equivalent, they are a bit different looking. They look like roiders.
And then the other question I had is in relation to climate change. Do you think that species like the natterjack toad, for instance, could actually be coming or moving more towards the Wales sort of path with warming temperatures? And
I don't think they would survive. I don't think so, but because they need more sparsely vegetated habitats. It's their ecology is easy to understand once you accept it's completely different to the common toad. So I won't talk about it now. They're explosive. They do not have explosive breeding strategy. It's much more protracted, and the females come as and when they're ready. They don't get spawning knots. The males are much better behaved. They're just so different. Their habitat would have suited them more here after the Ice Age, when it was more sparse habitat and little pools, and then as it started to vegetate up, it would become more suited to species like the common toad. So when you've got habitats like heathland and sand dunes that are encroached by scrub, etc., and you start to get you have a population of natterjacks there, and then you start to get widespread species of amphibian appearing. That's the beginning of the end. They do not manage to cohabit. Over a period, you get less and less. I've seen it so many times. Less and less natterjacks, more and more common toads, more and more vegetation, common frogs, newts. Okay, so I don't think that will help natterjacks personally. It's so difficult to predict. Really, really difficult to predict.
thank you.
Thank you. Right, I think we will leave it there. Thank you everyone for coming again. I hope you've enjoyed. Same time next week. So if you want to come to the next session, please do. I think we're looking at newts next time, Pete, is that right?
I think so.
I think so.
The most commonly confused group of amphibians and reptiles in the UK. So
Yeah.
we'll look at them in detail.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone, and have a nice rest of your evening. Bye.
Thank you very much. Cheers.